As parents, we want our children to grow up to be great kids and then great adults. And we learn as parents that there are easy, simple things that we can do that generally have a very large positive effect. That's what this channel is all about. Sharing these things with other parents, things that have worked in our home and I've seen them work for other people. If you like the idea of simple things that you can do that generally have a positive effect on raising great kids, check out my channel. Let's get right to today's video, which is how to stop arguing with your kids, or how to stop an argument with your kids. So what we're talking about here is a situation that is familiar to all of us. When you start to talk to your child about something, and all of a sudden you're starting to get some pushback, right? You think, this is probably going to be pretty easy and a little bit of a surprise, sometimes not a surprise. You're getting a little bit of a pushback from your child. So you start to raise your voice just a little bit. You try to make your point a little bit stronger. Then they make their viewpoint a little bit stronger. And then you might make yours a little bit stronger still. It's kind of an escalation. And it's turning into not a discussion, but an argument. When that happens, we kind of get very frustrated as parents. We're the parent. We're the authority. We want to be respected. We have the wisdom. We're trying to keep you safe. We're trying to guide you. But still, our children are little people and they have their own viewpoints and they can push back quite hard. That's what this video is about, a way to get out of these types of arguments, because we know when these types of arguments occur, we frequently don't have a clear winner. Clearly what happens is that we have clear frustration, but we don't necessarily have a clear winner. If you exert your will strong enough, you may find that you technically win, but it's kind of a grudging win, right? You tell your child to do something, they're fighting back, you're coming stronger and stronger, you have the most willpower, so you win, and the child's kind of like, oh yeah, I'll do it, or something like that, and they stomp off in frustration. So that's the kind of win that we sometimes get from these arguments. It's not a great win, and it's not a great feeling. And also, when that happens, we know that many times what we've been discussing doesn't really get followed through on. It doesn't really happen. Another thing that we know is that you could have a family with 3 kids, and you could have one child that hardly ever gets into an argument with their parents, maybe never. You can have another child that on rare occasions gets into arguments with their parent. And then you can have another child that gets into arguments quite frequently. They might occur once a week. They might occur twice a week. That child is somewhat argumentative by nature. It might be a personality thing. Might be other things going on in their lives. But when we have these frequent arguments in a family, it gets to be an issue. It kind of starts to get to be a little bit of a toxic environment when this sort of thing occurs. So I'm going to paint a scenario here. So I have a middle school child who comes home and plays video games every day. That's a way that he detanks from the school day. He's allowed to play an hour's worth of games. But you start to realize as a parent that a problem is beginning to creep in. That 1 hour is stretching to an hour and a half, to an hour and 45 minutes, to 2 hours. It's getting harder and harder to break your child from the video game, obviously, because then homework comes and who wants to do that? Let's do the video games, right? So it's getting to be a bit of a problem. So you're going to address this, and you kind of suspect, yeah, well, this might be, I might get a little bit of pushback on this because I'm going to tell my son, you know what, we're going to change things around, and I want you to do your homework first, and then you can play an hour of video games. Work before play. So you have this discussion with your son, you start it off, and yes, you do get some pushback. And then you kind of escalate a little bit, and he pushes back a little more, and you push back, he makes his point. And, what you've got is a situation where you're not getting any buy-in, any acceptance of your viewpoint whatsoever. Your child, your son, they just want to say no. No, I'm not going to do this. No, I can't do this because of this. No, you don't understand. That's one of my favorite ones, right? You don't understand. We hear that one a lot as parents. So you're in an argument. It's kind of spiraled out of control. You're both getting kind of hot with each other. You're butting heads. Each one of you is expressing your viewpoint, but neither one is getting their viewpoint across. And you can tell this is just a dead end. It's not going to go anywhere, and you're just getting more and more and more frustrated or angry. Not a great thing to have in a house. So how do we resolve this? I'm going to give you a simple technique that has 2 steps. It's easy to explain, but I will say that it is a skill. You may have to watch this video again or watch part of it again. You may have to practice it a little bit. It is a parental skill to develop, not that difficult, takes a little bit of effort, but once you develop it, it can be quite effective. So here's what we do. Number one thing you have to do is you have to learn when we're getting into this argument spiral and it's just spiraling out of control. We need to be able to recognize that. So you might say, well, that's an easy thing to do. Actually, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not so easy because when we get into these arguments, it tends to kick up our emotions. We're kind of getting into that fight sort of reflex. Now, we're not going to be exchanging blows, hopefully, but we're in a conflict. We're in a conflict, and that kicks up certain emotional things, and it can kind of tend to get out of control a little bit. We want to win the argument. Our child wants to win the argument. Our emotions are starting to key up a little bit. Our heart rates are kind of rising. And it's difficult to kind of be the detached observer sometime and learn, hey, I'm getting into this argument spiral. But you have to develop that. You have to be able to see it. At some point, you have to say, oh, we're getting into the argument. This is one of those things we've got to change. We've got to change this. Step 2, we're going to end the argument. We're going to essentially end the argument and resume it as a discussion in the future. Time is on our side. We're going to get some time. Now, how do we do that? How do we end the argument? So we're going to end the argument by using a transitional phrase. And I'm going to give you one, which is really a great one, I think, but you can come up with your own. And that transitional phrase is going to stop the argument and move it into the future so that we can all calm down and we can have, hopefully, a productive discussion in the future on the exact same issue. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. We are not going to be giving up and surrendering. It's very clear that we don't do this. Now, you have probably seen this in other homes. You're over a friend's house and they're getting into a sort of a heated discussion with their child. The child's pushing back really, really hard, and the parent at some point just kind of backs off. They give up. They surrender. It's kind of like, okay, you're pushing back hard. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I give up. We don't want to have that sort of scenario occur. That is not good. So what we're doing is we're simply going to be moving this discussion into the future with a transitional phrase. Now, here's one that I'll give you that I think works quite well. Just say to your child, we're not getting anywhere. I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to think about what you've had to say, and I'm going to ask you to also think about what I have said, and let's talk about this a little bit later. We'll talk about it after lunch, after dinner, something like that. Move it into the future 5 or 6 hours. Find a time frame when you can talk about this, when things are calmer. Maybe the homework's all done. Maybe your child has had a great conversation with a friend on the phone, they're in a great mood. Maybe you're tucking your kid in. Different time frame. And what you might find, or what we found in many occasions, is that the attitude will change quite a bit. So first off, in this scenario here, where you have a change in privilege on the video games, you have to do the video games after the homework. So what might happen when you push this into the future and you start this discussion over again is your child might say something like, I know you just want the best for me, and I probably should do my homework when I get home from school. So I'm gonna try. I understand what you're saying. You also might be a little surprised that your child, if they kind of lost their temper a little bit, they might come back to you and say, I probably said some things that I shouldn't have said. I know you're just trying to help me out. I don't know why I got so mad about it. I love my video games, whatever the case might be. Now, there is one situation that's an exception to this. You cannot defer an argument into the future. You cannot use this technique if it has anything to do with your child's safety. If your child wants to do something and you know that it's not safe, that argument has to be resolved at that time to keep your child safe. That cannot be deferred into the future. And let's face it, that's one of our key jobs as parents, is to keep our children safe. So to sum up, what do we have? We have 2 steps. First, be able to recognize that you're getting into an argument spiral that's just going to go out of control and it's not going to be satisfying to anybody. Nobody's really going to win. Number 2, after you recognize that, use a transitional phrase to move the argument into a discussion 4 or 5 or 6 hours downstream. when you can both kind of calm down and readdress this, kind of think about it a little bit on your own. That's the technique. It does take a little bit of practice, but it is a tremendous skill. Whoa, a little bit of a strange transition. Everything looks just a tiny bit different. Lost about 2 minutes of the audio in the last video, and I'm reshooting a section 2 days in the future. If it looks a little unusual, that's why. So let's finish up this video. Behavior like this, when you have arguments that occur frequently, people are butting heads, they're raising their voices. The other effect that can occur in a family is that they can be contagious, right? So let's go back to this family that we were discussing. We have the one child that hardly ever argues, one child that argues quite a bit, and one child that only comes up on an occasional basis. Well, that middle child might be looking at the child that argues quite a bit and says, hey, Jen is kind of getting her way with Dad from time to time. Maybe I should use some of her behaviors in future. She's kind of caught the behavior. And when you see this in a family, it's interesting because you'll see the child actually imitating the behavior, acting it out, and you know where it came from because they're using the same style points. And then you'll say something like, did you learn this from your sister? Or, you're copying what she's doing and I don't like it. But at any rate, this kind of behavior can be contagious. So having a solution, a way to transition out of it, transition to a reasonable discussion where both sides can communicate and hopefully get some resolution can be a good technique for preventing these types of infections. Now, the final point that I will make is maybe the biggest one. So I hope you've stuck around to listen to this final point because it's kind of huge. When we use this technique with our children, what we're really doing is we're teaching them something, right? We're teaching them how to transition a dead-end argument where people are getting heated to something that's a more reasonable discussion. That's a valuable skill in life because let's face it, arguments are part of the human condition. Our children are going to get into arguments with other people. When they get a little older, they're going to get into arguments with coworkers perhaps, or maybe with their boss. And certainly arguments can be a part of relationships. So when they find a partner someday, learning how to transition an argument into an actual productive discussion is a life skill, and it's a big deal. So you're really teaching them. It's a teachable moment. It's a teachable skill. So I think in some ways that might be one of the most valuable things about this technique. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you found something useful in your family. If you liked some of these ideas, click on the thumbs up. And if you really liked it, subscribe. I do a video every week on an interesting parenting topic. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next one.